Good afternoon, colleagues. Now, before we begin, as members may know, Saturday the 15th of August marks the 75th anniversary of VJ Day. Can I invite members to join me in observing a 1-minute silence to remember and thank those who fought for our freedom? Thank you, colleagues. We're now going to turn to First Minister's questions. Before we do, can I invite the First Minister to update Parliament both on coronavirus and also, I believe, a very serious rail incident. First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I give an update on coronavirus, I do want to briefly address the impact of serious storms across Scotland last night. There has been significant travel disruption and efforts are underway across the country to restore services and roads to normal. However, of most urgent concern is an extremely serious incident on the rail line west of Stonehaven, where a ScotRail passenger train derailed earlier this morning. The emergency services are currently on site and a major incident has been declared. I have just come off a call with Network Rail and the emergency services, and although details are still emerging, I am afraid to say that there are early reports of serious injuries. The Scottish Government Resilience Room is operational and I will be convening a SCORE meeting with partner organisations as soon as possible this afternoon. Updates will of course be provided as they become available. However, my immediate thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of everyone across the Chamber, are with all those involved in this incident. Let me turn now to the daily update on COVID. An additional 47 positive cases were confirmed yesterday. That represents 1% of the people who were newly tested yesterday and takes the total number of cases now to 19,126. A full Health Board breakdown will be available later, but my provisional information is that 24 of the 47 new cases are in the Grampian Health Board area. It's not yet clear how many are connected to the ongoing outbreak in Aberdeen, and I'll say a bit more about that just shortly. A total of 265 patients are currently in hospital with confirmed COVID, which is 4 fewer than yesterday. 3 people are in intensive care, which is the same as yesterday. I'm also pleased to say that yet again in the past 24 hours, no deaths were registered of patients who tested positive over the previous 28 days. So the number of deaths recorded under that measurement remains 2,491. National Records of Scotland has, however, just published its more comprehensive weekly report. This includes deaths of people confirmed through a test as having COVID, as our daily figures do, but also deaths of people where COVID is a presumed factor. The latest NRS report covers the period to Sunday the 9th of August. It records the total number of registered deaths with either a confirmed or a presumed link to COVID as 4,213. Of those, 5 were registered in the 7 days up to Sunday. That is a decrease of 2 from the week before and is the lowest weekly figure since the outbreak began. That said, every single loss of life is a source of grief and heartbreak, and my condolences again go to everybody who has lost a loved one. The NRS figures, however, do reinforce the point that COVID has, as of now, been driven to very low levels in Scotland. That is what has allowed us to take significant steps out of lockdown over July and August, and of course it's the reason schools are able to reopen this week. I know that many children today will be having their first day back for 5 months, and I wish them well and want to thank all teachers and school staff for all the work they have done, as well as thank parents for their efforts in supporting their children in these unusual times. Schools are going back because we've been successful in reducing COVID rates in the community, but there is no room for complacency. Today's figures show that we are still seeing new cases, and the ongoing cluster in Aberdeen shows that the virus can spread rapidly when it gets the opportunity. On the latest figures available, a total of 272 cases have been identified in the Grampian Health Board area since the 26th of July. As of now, 177 of these are thought to be associated with the cluster linked to Aberdeen pubs, and 940 contacts have now been identified from those 177 cases. In general, in the last few days, we've seen a slight fall in the number of new cases in Grampian and in those directly associated with the cluster. But despite this slight reduction, cases are still far higher than in any other part of the country and considerably higher than they were in Grampian before the outbreak started. So based on an assessment from the incident management team and advice from the Chief Medical Officer, the Scottish Government's conclusion is that it is not yet possible to lift any of the restrictions that were put in place last week for Aberdeen. Aberdeen City Council have been fully involved in these discussions, as have Police Scotland, who report good compliance with the restrictions. So if you live in Aberdeen, you should not go into someone else's house. Hospitality businesses such as pubs, restaurants and cafes must remain closed for now. And people who live in Aberdeen should not travel more than 5 miles unless they have to. You can travel for work or education, but you should not travel for leisure or other non-essential purposes. Similarly, we're advising people from outside Aberdeen not to travel into the city unless they have to. I know people in Aberdeen who, of course, are today coping with the impacts of severe weather as well as COVID will be disappointed by this decision, but I want to thank them for complying so well with the rules that we put in place last week. We continue to watch closely for any signs that the outbreak has spread to Aberdeenshire in any significant way, but at present we are not placing any additional restrictions on people living in the Shire. And I want to stress that nobody wants these restrictions to be in place for longer than is necessary. They will be reviewed again in 1 week's time, and as soon as we can relax any of them, we will do so. But at the moment, the number of new cases we are seeing is still too high for that to be a safe or a sensible course of action. Final thing I want to highlight in relation to the Aberdeen outbreak is that the significant majority of contacts identified are currently being traced within a day, and all contacts are being traced within 3 days. That is a real credit to the work of our test and protect teams, including people from outside Grampian who have been helping with the work in Aberdeen, and I'm grateful to all of them. To conclude, Presiding Officer, Aberdeen reminds us how quickly this virus can take off and how much effort is then required to bring outbreaks under control. It therefore reminds us that for the country as a whole to make further progress out of lockdown, we must continue to suppress it. Government has a critical, indeed the central role to play in achieving that, but ultimately we're all dependent on each other. It will be the choices all of us make as individuals on physical distancing, face masks, on washing our hands, that will decide whether we move forwards or backwards in our fight against COVID. So let me close by emphasising again the importance of facts, the 5 key things all of us must do. Face coverings in enclosed spaces, avoid crowded places, clean hands and hard surfaces regularly, 2-metre distancing remains the rule, and self-isolate and book a test if you have symptoms. These are the golden rules which can help us to stop the spread of this virus, and I ask everyone across Scotland to continue to comply fully with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Before we turn to questions, just to remind members, most questions, not all, but most questions have been on COVID, therefore, supplementary questions. Therefore, I'm going to continue to take all supplementary questions, constituency and otherwise, after question 7, all of them after question 7. However, if you wish to ask a supplementary, press your button as soon as possible. Turn now to question 1, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I add the thoughts of my party to those already expressed regarding the incident in Stonehaven today? It is clear that this incident is serious and it will have affected a number of families across Scotland. We think of them at this time and also those emergency workers who are currently in attendance. Presiding Officer, the last week has been a terrible time for Scotland's school pupils and a new low for this government's handling of our education system. Yesterday, the Education Secretary sought to draw a line under events, but questions still remain. For example, we spoke this morning with Abby from Prestwick, who had a conditional offer to go to Edinburgh University. Her father says that they were initially delighted by Mr Swinney's U-turn, but have since discovered that the offer from Edinburgh has been withdrawn based on last week's modified results. Yesterday, Mr Swinney said that more university places would be created to stop students being crowded out of a place that they would otherwise have been awarded. But that's not a guarantee of a place on Abby's chosen course. So will the First Minister write today to every Scottish university, making clear to them that every conditional offer made to students on their projected grades must now be honoured by them?
First Minister.
Can I say, first of all, that I'm sure members will understand that in no year can government guarantee a place at university for every young person. But we are absolutely determined to make sure that young people this year are not disadvantaged. I also, obviously, I'm not able to talk in detail about individual cases, but any member who wants to raise individual cases should do that, and we will seek to respond as fully as we can. The Education Secretary has already been in discussions with universities. We are determined not only that those who have the grades and had offers of places get those places, but also given yesterday's decision, which I think has been welcomed by pupils and parents across the country, then young people will not be crowded out of places, and discussions are ongoing to ensure that there will be additional places available at our universities, which I think is a welcome move. And given the massive disadvantages that young people, not just those sitting exams, but all young people across the country have suffered in the past 5 months as a result of COVID, I think that is a positive signal to them of this government, and I'm sure the whole country's determination to ensure that they have the opportunities in the future that they so richly deserve.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, frankly, the idea that we're at the 12th of August, we're over a week after results were issued, and pupils still aren't clear what's happening with university places is ridiculous. But one way to build trust back is to be more transparent. When the last SQA fiasco happened in 2000, Nicola Sturgeon was in opposition, and she insisted that the then Education Secretary, and I quote, give the Parliament a categoric assurance that he will make available all papers, correspondence and notes of meetings and of phone calls within his department and between his department and the SQA since the start of this year. The same thing needs to happen now. We know that this government doesn't have the best record in making documents available, but will she today give that guarantee, and will she start by confirming that the Education Secretary did indeed formally back the SQA's deeply flawed exam model?
First Minister.
Can I firstly say, on the issue of university places, in any year, the process of university admissions and the clearing process goes on for a period of time. This year, we are going to ensure that more places are available for young people, and I think that's a good thing. I think that is a positive thing that should be welcomed across the country. In terms of the SQA, the responsibilities and role of the SQA and the government, we'll make whatever Parliament wants available to Parliament. But I really don't think, I think the opposition, perhaps understandably given experiences with governments elsewhere, are maybe struggling to grasp a key element of this. The government's not trying to pass responsibility to the SQA. The government is taking responsibility itself. The government... Ruth Davidson refers to previous incidents with the SQA, and I remember them well, as she has just pointed out. But of course, one thing that is very different now to then is that right now we are living through a global pandemic. We were not able to have scheduled exams this year, and therefore we had to put in place an alternative process. We asked the SQA to put in place a process that maintained comparable standards with previous years. The SQA did that, but we have come to a judgment, given the impact on young people and not wanting young people to feel that their future has been determined by an algorithm, not by their performance, to come to a different conclusion. And the government has taken responsibility for that. We have acted with the best of intentions, but when we judge we got it wrong, we are big enough to say we got it wrong, to apologise to young people and to put it right. And actually, I think that's what people across the country want to see. This is a situation that will affect every government in the UK, as we will no doubt see tomorrow when A-level results are published for England and Wales. But what we will also see is whether governments elsewhere have the willingness to admit that they might have got it wrong and put it right comprehensively in the way that this government has done.
Ruth Davidson.
I'm sure the First Minister didn't mean to imply it, but she did just stand up and basically say that transparency is important when she asks for it, when we're not in a global pandemic, but the government gets a mulligan when we are in a global pandemic. And, Presiding Officer, yesterday we welcomed the announcement of a review into this entire debacle, but if trust and transparency are to be restored to the system, one key measure is for the SQA to show its workings. Now, in countries all around the world, exam scripts are returned to schools so that teachers can see exactly how students were graded and how those grades were modified. This simple measure would end the secrecy that erodes confidence in the way that our exam system is managed, and it would be a valuable tool in helping teachers to close the attainment gap in future exams. So will the First Minister commit to that today?
First Minister.
I know Ruth Davidson is just back on the front bench, but the SQA published its methodology last week. And it is there for people to see and to scrutinise and to draw conclusions around. The Chief Executive of the SQA has been before the Education Committee of the Parliament this very morning for reasons I hope Ruth Davidson will understand. I've not had the opportunity to follow that evidence this morning. I've been dealing with other things, but she has been answering questions from members from across the chamber. If there is other information that members want, the SQA and or the government will provide that. But fundamentally here, we have had to deal with an unprecedented situation. We have done that with the best of intentions, but honestly recognised that we made the wrong judgment and that we perhaps thought too much about standardisation in the system rather than individual experience in what is a unique year. And instead of doing what I suspect some others may do and simply dig our heels in, we have acknowledged that that was not the right thing to do. We have apologised to young people and we've put it right, and we're going to make more university places available. So I think that should all be welcome. Parliament is perfectly entitled to scrutinise all of that, and I, for one, am not scared of scrutiny, whether from Parliament or the electorate. In fact, I relish and welcome it.
Ruth Davidson.
So she won't write to universities, she won't release correspondence today, and she won't commit to returning exam scripts to schools in future. Presiding Officer, next week marks 5 years since Nicola Sturgeon announced that education would be her #1 priority. And in those 5 years, she's pulled Scotland out of international tests, her flagship education bill was scrapped, named person was struck down by the courts, poor students have been punished by a persistent attainment gap, hundreds of teacher vacancies are left unfilled, and we've just seen the biggest exam fiasco in the history of devolution. John Swinney has been the common denominator through all of this. Now, the First Minister's loyalty to a colleague may be commendable, but her real loyalty should be to the parents and the pupils of Scotland. They deserve new leadership in education, and John Swinney cannot deliver it. Why won't the First Minister see that?
First Minister.
I'm not sure loyalty to colleagues is a strong suit for Ruth Davidson. Ruth Davidson says, I won't write to universities. The reason for that is because John Swinney has already spoken to the universities. She says we won't publish how SQA is working. The reason I won't instruct them to do that today is because they did it last week. And of course, in terms of teachers in our schools, there are more teachers in our schools today than there was when I became First Minister, and we've just funded local authorities to employ more teachers in our schools. But you know, let's come to, and forgive me, Presiding Officer, my mind is not particularly on political matters this morning, but Ruth Davidson wants to have this kind of exchange. She really should think about the position from which she seeks to do it. Because just in a few months, I will submit myself and my government to the verdict of the Scottish people in an election. That is the ultimate accountability for our record and our leadership. And as we do that, Ruth Davidson will be pulling on her ermine and going to the unelected House of Lords. So can I gently suggest to Ruth Davidson that when it comes to holding to account and scrutinising politicians, she's really not coming at this from a position of strength, because it is not me who is running away from democratic accountability.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. For 4 months we've had this First Minister stand up and tell the people of Scotland that she doesn't do party politics. 9 minutes it took her. 9 minutes it took her to get there. And the difference, Presiding Officer, is this.
Let's have some order, please. Let's have some order, please.
The former leaders of the Labour Party, the Scottish Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Conservative Party, might want to go and serve in another parliament, yes, and she thinks that that's a bad thing. But not a word Not a word of condemnation for the former leader of her party that would rather shill for Putin's Pravda.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think all it's taken 9 minutes to do today is expose Ruth Davidson's raw nerve. But can I say, I don't criticise anybody for wanting to serve in any parliament. I just have an old-fashioned preference.
Have some order, please.
I just have an old-fashioned preference that they get elected before they do so. But, Presiding Officer, this government has serious issues to deal with, and we deal with them each and every day. We are not infallible. We make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, we put those mistakes right. And as First Minister, with my team of ministers, we are going to get on with the job of leading this country as best we can through the crisis it faces. And we welcome scrutiny for that, but we will not lose our focus on that central task, which is a more important one than any government has faced in Scotland for quite some time. And that is what I will be focusing on today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I begin by saying that all our thoughts go to those involved in this morning's incident at Stonehaven, and all our thanks and support go to the emergency service crews who are in attendance. Let us hope that lives are saved and not lost. I want Sam Galbraith out of office, not off the hook. Your words, First Minister, from the 24th of August 2000, when the then Education Secretary faced a vote of no confidence from this Parliament after 9,000 pupils didn't get their exam results on time. That's a fraction of the 75,000 pupils whose results were downgraded by the SQA on your own Education Secretary's self-confessed instruction. Why then, First Minister, do you want John Swinney off the hook rather than out of office?
First Minister.
Well, you see, I think people are going to have to make their own minds up about this, both in this chamber, although I suspect minds are pretty fixed on it in this chamber. And Richard Leonard is giving the impression that he's more interested in the politics of this than actually on having the issue fixed for young people across the country. But we are living right now in unprecedented and unique circumstances. We were faced with something that hasn't happened in Scotland in more than 100 years, the cancellation of our exam diet. There was no easy option open to ministers, just as there weren't any easy options open to the Labour government in Wales or the Conservative government in the UK. We had to come up with an alternative to exams to certificate our young people's achievements. And we came up with, we asked the SQA to come up with an approach that maintains standards, and we have reflected in the last few days that that was not the right approach. And we have the humility, frankly, to say we got it wrong and to apologise to young people and to put it right. And I think, particularly in these times of crisis, that is what people want to see happen. And I was struck by the comment of the father of a young person who had been affected by this over the last week, in something I read from him in the media about the Deputy First Minister. And he said this, and I actually suspect this is how not everybody, but probably the majority of people across Scotland feel. And he says this: "Show me a man that has never made a mistake and I will show you a man that's never worked. He's human. I take my hat off to him for saying he was wrong. Everyone makes a mistake and I hope everyone learns from this." That's the approach this government's taking to these unprecedented times. And it's up to the opposition, as it would have been up to us in opposition, to decide how they tackle these things. But I think all of the evidence right now suggests that the public want to see leadership that is prepared to admit in these difficult times when they get things wrong and to put them right. And that's the approach this government is going to continue to take.
Richard Leonard.
Well, let me go to something else which the First Minister said, and this is from August 2015. The First Minister said, "Let me be clear. I want to be judged on this. If you are not, as First Minister, prepared to put your neck on the line on the education of our young people, then what are you prepared to? It really matters." So, First Minister, if it really matters, why did neither you nor your Education Secretary listened to the voices telling you that the SQA moderation system was not right. You were warned in April, you were warned in May, you were warned in June, and you were warned again in July that this system would not work. In fact, in May, the Equality and Human Rights Commission warned that, and I quote, "The SQA have been unable to demonstrate that they have considered any equality issues in their work in this area, or that they have met their legal duties." We now know that the results were pre-released to John Swinney 5 days before the pupils saw them. He could have fixed it then. He could have saved all those young people from all that anguish. He could have saved you, First Minister, from having to make a grovelling apology. But he did not. Why isn't his neck on the line?
First Minister.
One of the things John Swinney announced yesterday is a review of this independently to look at the lessons that should be learned, and I think that is the right thing to do. I make a judgment that says we are in difficult circumstances, we didn't get this right, and I accept that. And I do think it is important to be absolutely open about that. We did not get this right. We acted with the best of intentions. We judged that it was important to have a set of results this year that were comparable in standards to those in previous years. I think now that was not the right judgment, which is why we have made the decision that John Swinney announced yesterday. So, I accept that in these circumstances we are living in, where there is no decision I or any member of this government has taken over the last 5 months that has been easy or where there has been an absolute right and wrong. We are living through the most horrendously difficult set of circumstances. But it's why it is so important to recognise that where, despite the best of intentions, we get things wrong, we don't dig our heels in, we put that right. And that's what we've done. And I think the evidence suggests people prefer that approach to government than the ding-dong exchanges that I, in opposition, have been as guilty of as anybody else. I'm not criticising that. But we are not living in normal times. Richard Leonard can quote me from 4 years ago or 20 years ago. We are living through a global pandemic right now, where the choices we face and the challenges that confront us are really, really difficult. So we will continue to lead the country through this as best we can, and we will not shy away from saying when we get things wrong and taking the action we need to do to put them right. And I do think that is what people prefer than the traditional approach to politics that we have in more normal times.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. But the point is that month after month after month, you were forewarned that this would be the problem that would arise when the results were announced last week. And judge me on education, the First Minister said. So those young people who demonstrated, who forced the government climb down, who refused to take this injustice lying down, the oldest of them have been at school for 13 years. So every single day of their education has been under the stewardship of the SNP. And where did it take them? Having to organise street demonstrations, online petitions, just to get the government to hear them and to give them the results that they had worked hard for. Schools all over Scotland are making a fresh start today. Pupils, staff, teachers have our good wishes and our goodwill, but they need the resources to make the return to school work. And they need an Education Secretary who they can have confidence in. Will the First Minister give them that and sack John Swinney?
First Minister.
Can I say firstly about the young people who made their case over the last few days so passionately? And as Richard Leonard rightly says, many of them, their entire school careers have been while my party has been in government. But, I reflect on the fact that the objectives of Curriculum for Excellence are to ensure that young people are confident individuals, engaged, active and responsible citizens. And I think these young people actually are a credit to the Scottish education system in the way they have conducted themselves, because they understand, and I've listened to many of them over the last 24 hours, recognising the difficult circumstances, welcoming the action the government has taken and welcoming the fact that both myself and the Deputy First Minister have apologised to them for the experience over the past few days. I do think, and it's not one of the few things that are not and can't be said to be my responsibility is how the opposition conduct themselves, I'm delighted to say. But I do think, for all the fact that the government got this wrong, and I keep saying that because I don't want anybody to think that I am shying away from that in any way, shape or form, but we put it right. And I think it's the opposition who are increasingly out of touch in not recognising that the public understand how difficult the situation we face right now is, and they want government and leadership that accepts that sometimes they'll get things wrong and they will put them right and they will continue to lead the country forward in the best way we possibly can.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Like all the other speakers, can I express our deep concern for all those who are affected by the rail accident near Stonehaven and for the emergency services responding, as well as for the public health professionals working to contain the Aberdeen outbreak. Children, young people and their families, as well as school staff, have been through so much this year, and we wish them the very best as schools return. And many thousands of young people do have extra reason to celebrate as an unfair policy is overturned. As the Greens warned for months, far from building back better, the SQA downgrades would have entrenched inequality in our society. But this isn't the only area where the Scottish Government's action has fallen short of its rhetoric about wanting COVID recovery to be the chance for a fairer, greener and more equal society. We've also been warning for a long time that this pandemic would lead to a housing crisis as well. And while the First Minister said that no one should be evicted because of the pandemic, she rejected Green proposals which would have protected private tenants, and instead she worked with the Conservatives to give extra help to landlords. Is the First Minister aware that there have been 350 applications for eviction orders during this crisis, and that's before we even count illegal or unchallenged evictions, and hundreds more applications are still outstanding as the tribunal resumes its work. How can this be acceptable?
Well, as Patrick Harvey, I think, is aware, I know he's aware, the emergency legislation which we passed through this Parliament, in effect halted eviction action for up to 6 months. So he talks about applications, but no people can be evicted. That emergency legislation is currently in place until the 30th of September. And of course, yesterday we confirmed that, subject to the agreement of Parliament, it will be extended to March 2021, which I think underlines the continuing commitment of the Government to do everything we can to protect tenants and also prevent people becoming homeless as a result of the pandemic. We also want to make sure that we continue our record investments in affordable housing so that we are building the houses that are needed for this and future generations. So I'm absolutely always willing to listen to where we can and should go further on these matters. But the protection against eviction that I have spoken about there is in place right now, and if this Parliament agrees it, will be extended.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, the emergency powers that were introduced at the start of this crisis did tackle the immediate issue of rough sleeping and prevented evictions till September. But it's clear now that this wasn't enough, given the outstanding applications that are already there and the new applications that have been made. And even if this temporary measure doesn't end in just a few weeks, there are other evictions which take place without those applications, informally or illegally. It's clear that every forecast shows that this pandemic will cause long-term economic damage to our most vulnerable communities. And given the timescale of eviction proceedings, those who have already lost their jobs or incomes during this pandemic could still face eviction in the middle of winter, even under the government's current plans. The First Minister will be aware that Andy Whiteman proposed a rent freeze and a ban on any evictions as a result of the debt that this crisis has created. If the First Minister still can't bring herself to back these policies, will she look at other measures to prevent a tidal wave of evictions this winter, or will we again be left looking to fix a crisis after the harm has been done?
First Minister.
I'm genuinely not sure if I'm missing something here, so I'm very happy to have further discussions with Patrick Harvey and his colleagues. In terms of Andy Whiteman's past proposals, I think I've stood here and explained some of the reasoning why we didn't accept some of those proposals, but took other steps which in some respects were with the same or a similar intent. But the ban on evictions that the original coronavirus legislation put in place, due to expire on the 30th of September, the government wants to extend it to March 2021. I can't say right now that that is definitely happening because it is up to this Parliament to vote on it. But if my party and his party votes together, then there should be no block on that. In addition to that, we took action in the second coronavirus bill that created, allowed us to create a private landlord pre-action protocol, similar to what is already in place for the social sector, which sets out specific actions that private landlords must take before even pursuing eviction action, and if they fail to engage with that and then they apply for an eviction order, a tribunal can refuse on the basis that they didn't meet the requirements of that pre-action protocol. We continue to work with tenant and landlord stakeholder groups to make sure that these issues are properly explored. So we have a very clear intention here to make sure nobody is evicted as a result of the crisis we are living through. That's why we've put in place these measures, and I remain happy to discuss with members from across the chamber. I know Polly McNeill has a question in a similar territory later on in this session. We remain happy to work with members across the chamber to see if there are further steps and further action we can reasonably take.
Thank you. Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
Our thoughts are with those affected by the derailment in Stonehaven and thankful to the efforts of the emergency services. With pupils returning to school, this means a whole new phase of interaction between large groups of people. I want to ask the First Minister about plans to protect those working and studying in those schools. The Scottish Government has Test and Protect, but when I look at Aberdeen last week, the city went from isolated incidents to a full regional lockdown in the matter of hours. Can the First Minister tell me why Test and Protect was unable to contain the virus? Schools should be amongst the last to close in the event of an outbreak, but is Test and Protect ready to protect our schools?
First Minister.
Can I come on maybe specifically to schools in a second, but Test and Protect, and this is part of the, I suppose, the learning journey that all of us are on here. Test and Protect on its own is not going to stop coronavirus outbreaks. We all have the principal responsibility to do that. We're the first line of defence. If it gets through us, Test and Protect is the second line of defence, and it's really important we all understand that and communicate that to our constituents. Test and Protect has worked very effectively in Aberdeen, and without Test and Protect, we would not be dealing with, albeit a large and complex outbreak, but one that I hope is on its way to being contained. We would already by now be dealing with widespread community transmission. The numbers of contacts that have been traced, the speed at which they have been contacted and traced is a real credit to the work of Test and Protect. Now, I'm not complacent about that because, you know, as First Minister, one of the questions in my mind is if we have several outbreaks at the same time, are the resources we've got sufficient to deal with that? And we are looking all the time at how we strengthen and improve the resilience of these arrangements. But I really do want to stress how well Test and Protect has worked and is working in Aberdeen, and give due credit to everybody involved in that. Part of the function of Test and Protect, of course, is to give us intelligence and information about where an outbreak has started and what the chains of transmission are. That is why so early on in this outbreak we were able to say that it had in all likelihood originated in the nighttime economy, and that is why we took the decision, the difficult decision, to close down hospitality. So I think we should, albeit it might seem a bit counterintuitive, I think all of us should take some confidence and assurance from how Test and Protect has worked, albeit we should not be complacent about the challenges that will lie ahead for that. In schools, Test and Protect will be available to any member of staff or young person who is symptomatic. There will also, on top of Test and Protect in schools, be surveillance through data gathering, and then in the autumn supplemented by surveillance testing in schools. And in addition to that, and the Deputy First Minister is going to cover this in a statement to Parliament this afternoon, so I won't go into all of the detail, but he will announce some further expansion of the availability of testing in schools to give greater assurance to teachers and other staff working in our schools. Final point, because I know Willie Rennie and the President Officer are probably getting frustrated at the length of this answer. The final point is this, and it's a difficult one for me to communicate. We, in all likelihood, will see outbreaks of coronavirus in schools, and in secondary schools perhaps in particular. It is how we contain those and make sure that those are properly dealt with that is the really important thing. And I want to give the Chamber assurance that that is absolutely an issue of priority focus for the Government.
Willie Rennie.
I'm equally sure that's why the First Minister understands that people are very nervous about what's going to happen following the opening of the schools. But they're equally nervous about universities too. 2 weeks ago, I asked the First Minister about whether she would agree to test all international students on arrival in the country. It was a policy supported by one of her science advisors, Devi Schridder. We want these students to come, but we want them to be safe too. The First Minister said she was considering this. I warned her that time was running out. We are 2 weeks closer to students returning. So can the First Minister tell me what has been decided? Will all international students be tested?
First Minister.
I can't give Willie Rennie the conclusion of those discussions because these are issues still under consideration. I absolutely, and I do have a very acute understanding of how quickly the virus can spread and therefore how urgent all of these decisions are. But I also understand that it's important to get them right so that they are sustainable and so that we can encourage and obtain real buy-in on the part of those we are expecting to comply with all these things. So that's why we are carefully considering, obviously with the university and college sector, and we'll set out more detail on that shortly. But as Willie Rennie, I think, knows, we listen very carefully to the advice of our advisory group, and Devi Schridder, who he quoted 2 weeks ago and again today, is a member of that advisory group, and we are paying very close attention to the recommendations that come from there.
Thank you. Question number 5, Gillian Martin.
Sir, to ask the First Minister what measures the Scottish Government can put in place to prevent bars being hotspots for the spread of COVID-19.
First Minister.
3 significant pieces of guidance for hospitality have already been published. Sector guidance covering essential measures like physical distancing, cleaning and hygiene, guidance on the collection of customer contact details, and guidance on additional mitigating measures for a 1 metre physical distance exemption. As we announced last week, we will be moving guidance now onto a statutory footing later this week, enhancing measures on safe practices alongside introducing mandatory measures to make the collection of visitor details mandatory. This recognises the need to ensure that following guidance is not seen as optional and is a key tool to balancing the risk between allowing the hospitality sector to operate while keeping the risk of transmission as low as possible.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. Clearly, the vast majority of eating and drinking establishments in Scotland have been complying with guidance since they were allowed to reopen. But as we've seen, it only takes a small amount to not have robust systems in place or to not manage them effectively for an outbreak to happen. Willie Rennie is blaming Test and Protect, but it is a compliance issue, which he'd know if his North East colleague ever went to NHS Grampian briefings. Is there scope for measures to ensure sanctions for businesses who do not comply with regulations and guidance? And what might they look like, and how can concerns be raised if customers have any?
First Minister.
I think Gillian Martin raises really good points, and in short, yes, we will continue to consider the balance between guidance and regulation, and also the balance between encouraging people to voluntarily do the right thing and impose sanctions when they don't. Enforcement is a key part of this, but I do continue to think it's important to encourage people to do the right thing for the right reasons. But across a range of these measures, the police have powers of enforcement, and we will continue to keep under consideration whether they have to be strengthened. On Test and Protect, I think Gillian Martin's right, although I have to say Willie Rennie is also right to question and scrutinise the resilience of Test and Protect. These are really important issues. But Gillian Martin is fundamentally right here when she says that it is first and foremost, in terms of keeping this virus under control, an obligation on all of us. I do think of it in this way of we are this first line of defence, so it's complying with all these measures that keeps that defence strong. When it gets through our defence, Test and Protect jumps into action, but it is then firefighting. So compliance is about how we give ourselves the best chance of not starting the fires in the first place. So my plea every single day is to businesses and individuals across the country for businesses, familiarise yourself with the guidance and the law and make sure you are complying. And for individuals, in everything you do, assume the virus is right next to you and make sure you are complying with the facts advice, because these are the things that will give us the best possible chance of keeping it under control.
Thank you. Question number 6, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that more than a third of culture and leisure trusts in Scotland may not be viable beyond 6 months.
First Minister.
Well, this is a really challenging time for individuals and organisations in the culture and leisure sector, and we will continue to do all we can to support them. Obviously, it's the responsibility of individual local authorities to allocate funding based on needs and priorities, but we're working closely with partners, including COSLA, Museums and Galleries Scotland and the Scottish Libraries and Information Council, to understand the specific circumstances faced in supporting culture and leisure trusts as they seek to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. We've also already taken action to support local authorities during the pandemic through both increased and front-loaded funding for councils, and of course we've made available funding in other ways to deliver financial support for the creative sector.
Graham Simpson.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The Chair of Community Leisure UK in Scotland, Robin Strang, issued the warning for the sector in a letter to COSLA President Alison Everson. And in it, he said that 70% of members will not be viable within 12 months. These trusts in Scotland have over 1,400 facilities. They include 232 libraries, 197 leisure centres, 466 outdoor sports courts and pitches, 39 theatres, 49 parks and 213 community and town halls. Now, these are vital to the health and well-being, physical and mental, of the nation. We can't afford to let them sink. But there have already been hundreds of redundancies. Now, I'm sure the First Minister will agree with me that this should not be a blame game. It isn't. So will she also agree, as a matter of urgency, to hold crisis talks with COSLA and to come up with a rescue plan?
First Minister.
As I said in my original answer, we are already working closely with COSLA on this and a range of other issues, and we will continue to do so. I absolutely recognise the impact that Graham Simpson outlines. I don't think there will be a single one of us in this chamber who doesn't understand the issues and the impact from our own constituency experience. So this is an important issue. Like so many of these issues where we are dealing with an impact of not so much the virus itself, but of the steps we've had to take to contain the virus, there are, I'm afraid, no easy answers. But we are determined to work with partners, in this case with COSLA and with other representative bodies, to find the best way forward. And we'll do that as collaboratively, but also as urgently as we possibly can.
Thank you. Question number 7, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the First Minister what Scottish Government's response is to reports of an increased number of evictions predicted for this autumn.
First Minister.
Well, with apologies to Pauline McNeill for being about to repeat the substance of my answers to Patrick Harvey, no landlord should evict a tenant because they've suffered financial hardship due to coronavirus. They should instead be helping their tenants access the financial support that they need. That was one of the reasons that the Housing Minister wrote to all private sector tenants to make sure that they are aware of the rights that they have. We also want to help tenants remain safe in their homes during the pandemic, and took action through emergency legislation to halt eviction action for up to 6 months. As I said earlier on, that emergency legislation is in place until the 30th of September. We want to extend it until March 2021, subject to the agreement of Parliament, which I hope underlines the Government's commitment to do all we can to protect tenants and prevent people becoming homeless as a result of the pandemic.
Pauline McNeill.
I have previously welcomed the increased allocation of money to the Discretionary Housing Payment Fund, but it does not touch the problem. In the private rented sector, almost 45% have seen a drop in their income since March. As you've heard, there are fears of mass evictions, not so because the next month will be more job losses. Let me put on the record, First Minister, that Scottish Labour wholeheartedly supports your announcement today. You will be aware that 25 housing and homelessness organisations call for this extension to the no evictions policy, so that is welcome. But having rejected the hardship fund and the fair rents bill proposed by myself, how else does the First Minister intend to help renters in this unprecedented crisis when the government, which has done some things, does not really seem to have a big idea to help renters survive?
First Minister.
Well, I've already run through in my response to Patrick Harvey some of the action we are taking, and we will continue to look at all of the steps we're taking and where we can do more. And that will include financial support. We increase funding, I think Polly McNeill alluded to this, for discretionary housing payments to help people in the rented sector. We've also more than doubled the Scottish Welfare Fund as we put together our programme for government for the year ahead, and also look ahead to our own budgetary process, making sure that we are helping people financially and in other ways with the impact of this crisis will be uppermost in our minds. And clearly that includes helping people struggling to pay their rents and those who are faced with homelessness. And I know there is a genuine willingness right across this chamber to be constructive as we try to come up with the right approaches to take, and that's why I look forward to continuing to have these discussions with members like Polly McNeill and being prepared to listen to any suggestions that do come forward.
Thank you. We've got a number of supplementary questions. The first from Angela Constance, to be followed by Maurice Corrie. Angela Constance.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, we've got some great news today. NHS Lothian have announced that they're going to reopen the children's ward at St John's on a 24/7 basis come October. And I'm very grateful to the Health Secretary, NHS staff and everyone who's worked with local families. But I wondered if the First Minister would pay tribute to West Lothian parents for their tenacity in campaigning hard for this much-loved service, but also for doing it positively to build the strongest case for this much-needed service. And going forward, can we now look forward to stability and security for our children's ward? Thank you very much.
First Minister.
I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome the decision of NHS Lothian to reinstate the paediatric inpatient service at St John's on a 24/7 basis from the 19th of October. They have undertaken considerable recruitment efforts to ensure that the service can safely be resumed on a 24/7 basis, and I hope everybody will agree that patient safety must always be the paramount concern, particularly when it's the health and care of children that is at stake. So I absolutely pay tribute to West Lothian parents who have campaigned to have the full service reinstated. They have, I think, been excellent in making the case on behalf of their children and on behalf of their communities. The government have always wanted to get to this position, but again, we had to ensure, and NHS Lothian had to ensure, that it was done safely. So I think this is a really positive day for St John's and for West Lothian. And finally, let me pay tribute as well to Angela Constance, who has assiduously stood up for her constituents on this really important issue.
Maurice Corrie, to be followed by Christine Graham.
Presiding Officer, thank you. Qualified dyslexia assessors have contacted me to tell me of the significant difficulties many people are having in booking their appointments for assessments during the current pandemic, which has in some cases worsened the mental well-being of those already vulnerable. With a severe backlog in the face-to-face assessment bookings, which will not resume until phase 4, what detailed support can the First Minister offer to professional assessors who feel they cannot do their job to the best of their ability?
First Minister.
Can I thank the member for raising what is a really important issue? I think everybody appreciates the reasons why face-to-face assessments are not always possible at the moment, but we want to get those services back to normal functioning as soon as possible. I'm very happy to take away the particular issue of dyslexia appointments and write to the member in more detail about, as far as I can, give some detail about the likely timing of the restoration of face-to-face assessments, but the steps we can take in the meantime to support people who don't have those opportunities, and I'll make sure that's done as quickly as possible.
Christine Graham, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I raised with you concerns of my constituents about a so-called party house in West Linton, where the proprietor, Michael Cameron, is apparently defying COVID security measures. For example, having had one weekend 30 men from London at a stag do, men who were too drunk for the police to safely disperse. Does the First Minister agree with me that this attitude beggars belief and could cause a spike not only locally in the virus, but beyond?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree. I think that is conduct that is not responsible in the circumstances we live in. The guidance is very clear that large numbers of people from different family groups should not be gathering in shared accommodation for leisure purposes such as stag and hen parties. The rules that govern circumstances in which you can spend time with friends and family apply both at home and away from home at any type of holiday accommodation. And we've seen in Aberdeen what can happen with gatherings that don't adhere to the guidance, particularly where alcohol is involved. So we would expect guests to comply with guidelines and absolutely expect accommodation providers to act responsibly when letting larger properties. The recovery of our tourism and hospitality sectors is at a very, very fragile stage, and I would urge everyone to play a full and responsible part in supporting that recovery, while of course keeping COVID suppressed.
Jackie Bailey, to be followed by Keith Brown.
The First Minister will be aware that the A83 at the Reston Be Thankful is closed again as a result of a major landslip last week, and I'm sure she will want to join with me in thanking those working hard to open the road again. But all the political leaders in Argyll and Bute Council, Mike Russell, Donald Cameron and myself, have written to you jointly to press the case for more action to be taken, because the economic impact on the area is absolutely devastating. So will the First Minister therefore agree to convene as a matter of urgency the A83 task force to focus on finding a permanent solution and to find it quickly?
First Minister.
Look, I thank Jackie Bailey for raising this. It is an extremely serious issue, and I want to thank all those travellers and services involved in this for their forbearance and work at the moment. We must find a solution to this. This issue was raised yesterday by Michael Matheson at Cabinet, and he is seeking to take forward that joined-up approach to determining what the best way forward is. So I want to assure the Chamber that this has the utmost priority on the part of government. Clearly, there is a lot of work to be done on developing that solution, and we will keep Parliament updated.
Keith Brown, to be followed by Mark MacDonald. Keith Brown.
As the First Minister has said, it's very welcome news that our schools are going back today. But as she's also said, there will be anxiety associated with that return to schools, and that anxiety will have a number of sources. Can the First Minister say what social security support the Scottish Government is providing for families whose children are returning to school?
First Minister.
Well, I think it's a very important point. I'm sure the return to school this morning provoked a mix of emotions in young people and in parents, of excitement, relief probably for parents, but also a degree of anxiety and nervousness. But for some families across the country, the financial cost of the return to school is also a real consideration. So many parents and carers will be eligible for the Best Start Grant school age payment, which is the most important form of support that we provide. It provides £250 to parents and carers who receive certain benefits or tax credits and have a child who is old enough to start primary school. Parents don't need to take up a school place to get the money. So if you're homeschooling or if you have deferred your child's start date, you can still apply for the Best Start grant. And of course, parents and carers may also be eligible for the school clothing grant and also free school meals. So I would encourage anybody to go and find the details of that. The details can be found on the Scottish Government website.
Mark MacDonald, to be followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister's announcement regarding the extension of the restrictions in Aberdeen is understandable, but nonetheless will come as a disappointment to many across my constituency. Yesterday at Topical Questions, I asked the Health Secretary about a very specific issue which has been raised with me by a number of constituents who rely on grandparental support to look after children, but where those grandparents stay, for example, in Aberdeenshire, where the family stays in the city, or vice versa. Some of those constituents are teachers who are today welcoming pupils back to school and rely on that family support to care for their children. What assurance can the First Minister give me that there will be very clear guidance about whether those arrangements are possible so that alternatives can be sourced where necessary?
First Minister.
I know the difficulties these restrictions are having for people in Aberdeen. I will, once I get out of the chamber today, look specifically at this particular case to see whether there is further guidance we need to give to provide clarity. The advice at the moment, though, is that people should not be going into other people's houses unless you have already formed an extended household group or if you have caring responsibilities. So that's the guidance, but if there is a need to make any aspect of that clearer, I will undertake to ensure that is done later on. I very much hope these restrictions are not in place in Aberdeen for too much longer. They will be reviewed again in 7 days and we will lift them, some or all of them, just as quickly as we can. But it is important that not just we have them in place right now, but that people comply with them, and we will try to support people in Aberdeen with guidance to make that easier to understand as much as we can.
Maureen Watt, to be followed by Alison Johnson. Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In order that the many establishments who abided by the rules in Aberdeen are not further disadvantaged by the few, will the Scottish Government ask the Treasury to extend Eat Out to Help Out to support hospitality when the city does reopen? And will the Scottish Government consider reopening cafes which do not have an alcohol licence?
First Minister.
On those 2 points, yes, we will make that case to the UK Government. I think that would be a reasonable case to make, and I hope they will be prepared to listen to that. On the issue of cafes, it was, I know, discussed at the Incident Management Team Resilience officials meeting that formulated the advice that came to ministers about continuing the restrictions, that they looked at whether the restrictions now could be lifted for some parts of hospitality, but the clear advice is that at this stage it would not be safe or sensible to do that. But we will continue to review whether the restrictions need to be in place at all, and whether they do, if they can be lifted from any part of hospitality. We want to make sure they are not in place longer than necessary, and that while any restrictions have to be in place, there is a proportionality to them.
Alison Johnson, to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you. In 1998, the late Donald Dewar rightly called the persecution of birds of prey in Scotland a national disgrace. 22 years on, it remains a national disgrace. The grouse shooting season begins today, and this week we have learned of the disappearance of a golden eagle on a grouse moor, following close-on news of a poisoned sea eagle. Now, such shocking events, sadly, are far from rare. Indeed, a senior RSPB conservation officer has said, "You become a little numb to it. You're almost waiting for the next one." Scotland should be a haven for wildlife. It should not be a haven for wildlife crime. So when will the First Minister finally act to end raptor persecution in Scotland for once and for all?
First Minister.
I understand both how serious an issue this is and how understandably and legitimately upset people are at the issues that Alison Johnson has outlined. Wildlife crime is a priority for Police Scotland. The Government, in a range of ways, of course, is reviewing the law and guidance around these issues, and I will ask the Environment Secretary to write to her with an update of the Government considerations on these issues as soon as possible.
Beatrice Wishart, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
2 weeks ago, I asked the First Minister to give my constituents clarity about the timescales for reopening adult daycare and respite services. The First Minister said she would look into it and come back with detail very soon, and I thank her for a reply. But the response I received yesterday said no more than what we already knew. Detailed guidance is still not available. So can the First Minister please now give some indication, especially for the families who think they are always left behind, as to what is happening with these much-needed services?
First Minister.
Just Wishart for raising the issue again. I'm glad she referred to the letter. I was sure I remembered signing off a reply to her in the last couple of days. I have given as much information as I am able to give right at this moment, but I undertake to write to her again as soon as we are able to give more clarity on dates and time scales. I absolutely understand, I think particularly for the families in her constituency, that feeling perhaps of not really being on the priority list. I want to assure them that is not the case. We are dealing with a whole range of complex issues here about determining things that are safe or as safe as possible to do, and in what order and in what way. And we are trying to make sure that relevant guidance is developed with the right clinical input as quickly as possible. So I will again and ask the Health Secretary to again look at this issue in light of her question and endeavour to give as much additional information as I can as quickly as possible.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, a survey published last week by the British Dental Association Scotland revealed that 52% of largely or exclusively NHS practices and 86% of mixed practices predicted a reduction in NHS work over the next year due to the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on the provision of NHS dental services. Given the precarious position facing dental practices, What additional financial support will be provided to ensure the viability of these practices, without which there is a real possibility that dentistry in Scotland will quickly move towards a two-tier system with reduced access for NHS patients?
First Minister.
There isn't and shouldn't be seen to be a two-tier system of oral health care. Dental practices, if they are ready to do so, can provide aerosol-generating procedures in patients with urgent dental problems from the 17th of August. And of course, we have 75 urgent dental care centres throughout Scotland where patients continue to be referred to. In terms of funding, we recognise the pressures that COVID is bringing to bear on all aspects of our health service and all areas of our economy, and we will continue to work with the dental profession to seek to provide whatever support we can. We're already making exceptional payments to the value of around £12 million per month to support NHS dental incomes, which shows the degree of financial help being provided to meet the challenge of these difficult times, but we'll continue to look at what more we can do here, as we will do in all other areas.
Alexander Stewart, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you will be as concerned as I am that Clackmannanshire Council, the smallest council in Scotland, has had the second highest level of domestic abuse incidents during lockdown. Clackmannanshire Women's Aid have said that the problem is so severe that they may not be able to cope and require assistance for people as lockdown eases. Therefore, First Minister, what urgent action can the Scottish Government put in place to ensure that women, children and young people receive the support they require?
First Minister.
I'll ask my officials, as a result of the member's question, to liaise with Scottish Women's Aid in Clackmannanshire in particular to see if there's any support we can offer. We have acknowledged, and I think people across the UK and indeed further afield have acknowledged from the start of this pandemic that lockdown would create its own very serious problems, and the potential for domestic abuse undoubtedly was one of those problems. We have already made available additional resources to organisations working in this field in order that the helpline could continue, for example, during the pandemic. So we take all of this extremely seriously indeed, as I know does Police Scotland, who continue to make very clear and made clear. The Chief Constable made this very point when he did one of the daily updates with me, that notwithstanding the difficulties and restrictions of the pandemic, anybody who feels at risk or under threat of domestic violence should contact the police, and the police will respond appropriately. But we will continue to do what we can to support those frontline organisations supporting women or anyone who is subject to the threat of domestic abuse.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Claire Adams.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I have this morning taken receipt of the first batch of Freedom of Information requests from local authorities around teachers who've spent lockdown shielding and are expected to return to work this week. There are 151 of them in North Ayrshire, 134 in Glasgow. Those numbers paint a picture of thousands of teachers and thousands more pupils in the most vulnerable categories expected to return to the school environment with COVID still at large. For secondary teachers and pupils at the upper end of the school, their anxiety will be all the more acute. The First Minister told Willie Rennie that she expects outbreaks of schools to take place. So what reassurance can she give those groups that they are safe to be there? And what particular measures will she ask schools to employ to keep them safe?
First Minister.
Well, these are important issues, and I would give assurance, or seek to give assurance, in a number of ways. Firstly, the advice we give to people in the shielded category is not given lightly. We consider it very carefully. It is informed by clinical and expert opinion, and it will continue to be so. The advice that we gave from the start of August that shielding could pause was one we agonised over and will continue to obviously keep under review. In terms of the position in schools, well, so before I go on to schools, we have produced workplace guidance for people who were in the shielded category and employers to make sure that the right considerations are taken into account to make workplaces safe. And in schools, the guidance has put in place a number of mitigating factors to ensure that schools are safe and the right protections are being put in place. And again, we will keep that under very, very close review. The Deputy First Minister will cover more of this ground when he makes a statement to Parliament this afternoon, and that will include extensions to the position around testing. We will not hesitate to change the advice and the guidance we give to people in the shielded category if we think that is necessary. We've all got a responsibility to help ensure it's not necessary by keeping the virus under control. And of course, we are seeking to develop on an ongoing basis the range of information we give to people so that they are better able to assess their own risks in the particular areas they live in. So these are issues that will be under review on literally a daily basis.
Claire Adamson to be followed by Bill Bowman.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the whole Chamber would want to wish all pupils returning to school this week the very best in what are unprecedented times. But can I also ask the First Minister to extend her thanks to the cross-cooperation work of the Education Recovery Group in developing the protocols that are in place to ensure that staff, pupils and teachers can have confidence that the best measures are in place to avoid COVID-19 breakouts.
First Minister.
Yes, I would record my thanks to everybody who's been working really hard to help us through COVID, but also to make sure that the right guidance is in place to help people return safely to workplaces, whether that's schools or any other workplaces. The Education Recovery Group has not had an easy task, but I think it has done a really good job. And as I just said in my previous answer, all aspects of the guidance in schools will be kept under review, as we will keep under review any emerging evidence from Scotland, the UK or any other part of the world. But I do want to take the opportunity to thank teachers, support staff, janitors, cleaners and caterers, everybody working in our schools who have done such a huge amount of work, but who will also, as parents and family members themselves, be feeling a sense of anxiety right now, just as young people are. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to give as much assurance as we can that we will continue to strive to make sure the right protections are in place.
And Bill Bowen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to join with Ruth Davidson, the First Minister, and others who have expressed their shock and concern with the events unfolding in Aberdeenshire today. The First Minister has said there have been many agencies involved in this particular occurrence. There will also be many people who are very concerned that they have friends or loved ones involved. Can the First Minister point to a central point of contact that they can use to try and get information about their concerns?
First Minister.
I think that is a very important suggestion which I will undertake to put into action later on. I'm sure Parliament will understand that I mean no disrespect to it when I say I'm anxious to get out of the Chamber right now so that I can firstly be updated on the current situation, but make sure that all of these practical arrangements are being put in place. As I said earlier on, I spoke to Network Rail, to the Police and Fire Service just before coming into the Chamber. The details that were available then were still minimal because this is an ongoing incident. It has happened in a very difficult location for emergency services to access. And I know and can appreciate that there will be many families who are anxious if they believe they have relatives who were on that train. So we will do everything we can to make sure the emergency services are supported, families are supported, and that there is a clear, it may be something that while we've been in the Chamber, the emergency services have already put in place, but if not, we'll make sure that there is a point of contact for anybody who has worries about their relatives or friends can access over the course of the day.
Thank you very much. And that concludes First Minister's questions. I'm going to suspend Parliament. We'll resume at 2:30 with a statement on schools returning. Parliament is suspended.